is it to have all the teams in this year?
I think it's huge to have all 10 teams finally in F1 Esports. It's Ferrari were the one team that kind of were watching and waiting, and obviously the first event they've gone and won two out of the 3 races.
And a podium in the other.
And a podium in the other one. So yeah, they've done a Ferrari job on us and come in late and done a great job. But I think with Formula One Esports this year specifically, it's grown and grown every year, and I think from Alfa Romeo's point of view, we try and take it as seriously as we can. We prepare our drivers every day, so we've got our drivers practicing, between 50 and 60 hours a week, and we're combining that with content. We want to engage with new fans that might not watch the real sport, but certainly with an esports audience, we see it as a way that we can potentially enhance and grow our commercial portfolios. We can draw people into from the esports world to F1, which I think is a necessary thing to be doing. You look at the average age of Formula One in the real world now, and it's maybe around 40 years old, and it's getting older and older. And there's a challenge there to engage with a younger audience, which are now doing in esports, and attracting them to what we're doing in the real world as well.
How can you cross over, get those young fans going from, because at the moment that seems like the aim is to get young fans interested in esports, cross over from esports into real world racing?
I guess that's one of the aims, but I don't think it's the only one. I think eyeballs on anything to do with the sport and the brands that are involved in the sport is important. So if they happen to be racing virtually rather than watching a TV show of the real thing, then that's great. I think the important thing is all of the big names are involved. If you look at other sports, I know there's a panel before talking about other sports simulation, it's almost done via the gaming side rather than a drive from the promoters or from the brands that are involved. But the fact Ferrari are the biggest name in motorsport, let's not debate that. But all of the top drivers have an involvement and an interest in it. Dom can talk about probably 2 of the biggest young stars in motorsport, Max and Lando. Are they gamers or are they racing drivers? The blurring has already happened. They're both of those things. Big companies like Renault putting huge efforts into this. We represent Mercedes in this space. They probably are investing more than anyone in there. So I think it's important that those guys are in there. Why are they in there? Exactly as Jamie was saying, the average age of the F1 fan is going up. There are less ways of engaging with F1 because it's going behind a paywall in terms of the TV broadcast. So any way that you can bring volume of eyeballs and engagement to the sport, everyone's jumping on that bandwagon. But what we've got to remember is Simracing has been around a long time. As I jokingly said, Dom's been in it for longer than all of us. And it's not just about F1, but the important thing is F1 seems to have taken it and given it an audience that it didn't have before, which means all the other parts of the sport are also growing now as well.
There's also an education piece as well, because not everybody understands the technology behind these cars, and having a game out there that teaches you about ERS or hybrid systems and how to drive, when people play the game, they then go and watch it on TV, they understand that. And I think that's a challenge that any kind of technical sport always has, and that gaming has always had that ability. And I think finally brands are starting to realize that they can leverage that and use it as an information piece, and then get people to actually migrate to being fans of motorsport, which is struggling in many ways.
So I think to put some numbers around it, we did a survey 3 years ago, and people that were playing Gran Turismo at the time, which is obviously the biggest selling racing game on console or PC, 78% of the people that we surveyed said that they found racing through gaming, not the other way around. Now, when I was a kid, I was taken to a racetrack, shown some racing cars, smelt the rubber, watched people driving very badly at a club race, and that's how I found racing. These guys are finding it through gaming, and there's a great study out of the University of Michigan, going back to other sports, that very clearly states that the reason that the Major League Soccer has grown so fast in America is completely down to FIFA. There are kids in deepest, darkest Alabama or in Chicago or wherever you want to be, and they know who the left back is, if there is a left back these days. of West Ham or who the centre midfield of Aston Villa are. They've found their sport through gaming first, and then they go on to kicking a ball or watching a game or buying the jersey, whatever it might be. So I think most people here would understand that gaming is an important cultural phenomenon. And do you know what? The motor industry's completely missed it up until the last 2 years, and suddenly everyone's rushing towards this space.
Why was it the last 2-3 years? Was it the Formula E Vegas that kind of suddenly got everyone interested in it? Because we've gone from very little from a kind of sports involvement to suddenly everyone's involved. And 2017 seems to have been that kind of tipping year.
I think certainly the biggest reason was probably because Bernie Ecclestone was running Formula One, and I think certainly he had his ways of doing things in the sport, and obviously Liberty have taken control and been much more kind of open and receptive to esports as a viable sport in itself. And I think for this to grow, for sim racing to grow, I think motorsport and their needs in terms of how important esports can be to help grow their own audience. We as an industry need to kind of obviously focus as well on helping sim racing be a viable esport. That's a huge challenge. It can't just be seen as a way to bring audiences back to the real world. I think if you watch a sim race, if you watch the F1 Esports series, every race is hugely competitive. First to 20th is 0.3 of a second. You get a lot of overtaking, which you don't always get in the real world. And it's about telling that story to more people, because every time I've watched a race, I'm immersed. I love it, and I know the guys on the panel will say the same. But I think not enough people know about sim racing, and that is, like I say, a massive challenge for all of us to grow.
I think Formula E was a catalyst, though, because every automotive and series kind of looked at Formula E and goes, these guys are kind of new kids on the block. They're always trying something crazy and new. And actually, they came up with this $1 million sim racing tournament at CES. They had, and I just remember being there and seeing all the people in the audience, big movers and shakers within tech, within automotive. And I think it was a bit of an eye-opener for them. And they were thinking, do you know what, this is how we need to engage with younger people. And from then, F1 were like, right, we need to do something as well. And every automotive and series needs a slice in this game now.
Do you think the publishers are kind of part with that drive as well? Because to get a game to an esports level takes some work. It's not something you can turn around and run tomorrow if it's not already set up.
Oh, no. And I think, building esports into a game, it needs to have that organic kind of esport community behind it. So many games just go, right, we're going to be an esport, and they just push something out, and then it's just like, esports ready is definitely. But there's a lot of racing games like that just are not good for broadcast and not good for that show. Some are really excellent. Certainly the higher end sims have been doing this for a long time. So R-Factor and iRacing, for instance, they've been very strong on the broadcast side, and I see some GT Sport are also doing well there.
And we've seen a lot of crossover. I mean, there was the point Darren made, it's like, do you see Max and Lando as coming from gamers who have made it into Formula One? Because they were, as you said, they were gamers before they were F1 drivers. They might have had, so the lines are blurring massively between it.
I think so. Like some of the games now, they are close to what the guys actually drive in the simulator. So, you might drive some of these high-end sims at home, and then you're going to the simulator, and it feels nearly the same. And actually, it's really good practice. So the Max and Lando are driving in the sim, against, ordinary Joes at home, and they drive for 24-hour races and things like that, and it helps the concentration. And Max loves driving at night. He doesn't do that a lot in F1, apart from Singapore, I guess. But yeah.
Well, I think we had a project with McLaren, which sort of McLaren was seen as the first F1 team to get involved in esports in a concerted effort. And we took a gamer that was racing on R-Factor predominantly, and he got signed as McLaren's Formula One simulator driver. There was no extra training needed. It was like back in the day scouting a footballer in your local park. We were finding the best of the best, and then they went to that
And
area.
they went into proper cars as well. It wasn't just a sim side. Racing in the Race of Champions, for example.
Yeah, well, we did that, I guess, 10 years ago. Won't bore everyone on the
GT,
panel,
yeah.
but we had a GT Academy, which was, I guess, one of the first mainstream racing, automotive and gaming combines. And yeah, that was a global program that we found 23 drivers that had never raced a race car before and ended up racing in the real world. You know, a lot of them still racing. Some of them earning good money. You know, one of the guys, I guess the most high profile, called Jan Mardenborough, lives in Tokyo in an apartment, probably earning more money than all of us on the panel here, and races cars for a living. And he'd never sat in a racing car before GT Academy. So that's already been proved. You know, the fact that you can move from real racing back to simulation, back to gaming, as Max and Lando are doing, or there's this huge talent pool that can't afford to go real racing that you could somehow get them into real racing. The blurring of the lines is there. And that's why I guess we've got a separate panel for esports, racing, sim racing, whatever you want to call it, because it's the only game that can allow you to be really close to the real world. And of course, you're not going to get someone that's really good on, you know, FIFA going to play for Tottenham next weekend. So that genuinely has happened in this space.
Yeah, is that just a four-wheel? Because MotoGP, for example, have theirs, but to go from using a handheld controller to being in a MotoGP bike is a very big step, where four-wheeled, it's a lot closer.
But I think that's, you know, we try and bundle everyone into the same space.
Yeah.
MotoGP are doing something very different. They would never put someone that's, as you say, pushing a controller and putting them on a bike. But, you know, they saw quite early that they needed to be in this space. They've got a very successful game. And they're using this really to do two things. Number one, sell more games, which is pretty sensible, which I guess what sometimes this is all about. And secondly, you know, get some of their partners from what they're doing in the real racing into the virtual space. And they had, I think at launch, 2 or 3 years ago, they had 8 big blue chip brands that were sponsoring their esports category. So because those brands knew they needed to talk to a different audience.
Is that the same for someone like Renault as well? You need to be talking to those audience. And how did that opportunity with Vitality come about?
So I think it's early 2018 we made a partnership with Vitality, and the main idea was to go to Esport, but we didn't know how to do that. So on one hand we had like the F1 Esports series going on, and we needed people that were, you know, competent enough to help us with the F1 Esports series. On the other hand, we always have, like at Renault, a need to find younger clients and find younger audiences. So as for Formula One, for the team, it's important to reach out younger audiences, but as well for the brand to create and build some brand image around esports. But as well as internally, we have like 160,000 employees all over the world. They are into esports. We communicate internally about that. And so with Vitality, the thing is that Renault Group is sponsor of Vitality, and Vitality is partner of Renault F1 team. So, for instance, they got their logo on the car during the Silverstone Grand Prix and the French Grand Prix. So the aim is to, as well as Vitality is helping Renault to get involved in esports, we are helping Vitality to grow. So we created the Renault Sport Team Vitality, which is a kind of title organization which competes on Rocket League and on the F1 Esports Series. On Rocket League, it's going on very well. We are world champion at the moment.
That's a debatable topic with Rocket League on here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it anything to do with the sim racing?
I think it's completely different because obviously they are playing.
It's very accessible from a traditional kind of gamer's background.
So, for instance, we decided to go on the F1 Esports Series and on Rocket League because we wanted to have a foot on the big games in esports, and it totally makes sense for us. It's driving cars, playing football. We compete against PSG, FC Barcelona, for instance, as well. So it's interesting spot for us as well to promote what is Formula One. We had the Rocket League team at Enstone training for a boot camp, doing some reaction tests with driver physio, for instance, as well. So yeah, with Vitality, we are trying to bring our expertise in terms of preparation for the drivers and for the sport people. So this is how it goes with Team Vitality at the moment. Yeah.
I know it's away from sim racing a little bit, but with Rocket League, you know, is that an accessible thing that you could go into, especially with the fact that Intel World Pro is going on kind of just before the Olympics next year, and that's going to be Street Fighter and it's going to be Rocket League are the two.
Yeah.
So it's a big opportunity to tap into this kind of global sports audience and the gaming audience.
Yeah, obviously, because I mean, sim racing is still growing, it's still small compared to the other esport game. So it's a way for us to get involved with esports, not only sim racing. It makes sense for us to support Team Vitality on Rocket League, but we sponsor them on CS:GO, League of Legends, and other properties like that. So yeah, it's interesting for us to have a fit in there.
I think that's an interesting point, is automotive brands getting involved in other platforms. People as you know, in our space, Honda, for example, normally very, very conservative in terms of what they get involved in. Suddenly, are big partners in other areas of esport outside of racing. So I think the automotive world, most brands have got something that they're involved in outside of the racing side.
They probably need to. They know they need to, because it's a huge time of flux for the industry.
Yeah.
And they get League of Legends, for example. Ford have just launched Fordzilla, their own team. So there's different manufacturers are taking different approaches to how they get involved, and Renault obviously a different approach as well.
And Mercedes, don't they sponsor a Counter-Strike team? I don't know.
Yeah. In fact, they own the team as well in Austria. So, yeah, I mean, lots and lots of the automotive brands have something. My old company, Nissan, have just designed some gaming chairs, which is exciting breaking news over the weekend. So everyone's at a different level. I mean, Mercedes have got an ESL partnership.
Which is ESL's German setup, and Germany, I think, is probably the biggest esports nation around Europe as well.
Mm-hmm. So, but we within the racing side, we have got to prove that there is a benefit to this for the brands. Otherwise, they could just stick their stickers on other big games that are, as you say, selling more copies or got more viewers. But the brands know, we've got some really, really big brands. Ferrari coming, we just talked about. Porsche making a really big push in this space as well. So, this is not just the mainstream brands, like the Renaults, like the Fords that you mentioned, but it is the premium brands as well that aren't scared of getting involved in this space, because that's where their consumers of the future are.
Yeah, Porsche pulling resource out of real motorsport or professional motorsport. They're focusing on Formula E. They're focusing on sim racing. They're focusing on where their market's going to be.
Is that start of a trend?
I think so. Yeah, we're already seeing that some of the others are copying what Porsche are doing, and I can just see that.
There was a headline last year: BMW swapped Le Mans for sim racing. Just so happened in the same announcement they said they were stopping racing at Le Mans and putting more effort into sim racing, but that was the headline.
No, completely. I want to pick up on one of the questions that's been asked in terms of how long do you think it will take sim racing to get to the same audience level as FIFA, Call of Duty or Fortnite? It feels like we're a long way, and is that even a fair comparison?
I guess this guy might be able to answer that with his football background.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can put a number really on that. I think all the manufacturers and all the teams can do is promote it and tell a positive story. Fortnite, the numbers that gets compared to other simulation games is vastly different. So I think it would be unfair to compare that to Fortnite. Will it get there? That's our aim, that's our ambition. And I think as an esport, it's still a very immature esport, sim racing. Like Don mentioned, it's only been really in the mainstream for a couple of years, and it takes a long time for new brands and new manufacturers to kind of build confidence in what they're doing. Dipping their toe in the market and seeing is it a positive thing for us? Is it not? And I think as the years go by, as the F1 Esports series grows and other titles develop, these manufacturers will be putting more money into it, putting more money into promoting sim racing, and I think all these brands are recognising that, that when they're going to sell cars to first-time buyers, or whether it be just for brand recognition, they need to be operating in esports. They need to be engaging with young people. Certainly from Alfa Romeo's point of view, when we first started working with them, they're very tentative, very nervous, didn't really know what to expect. And I think by providing them with a positive experience, now they're kind of like, they can't get enough of it. They're like, what's next? What else can we do? Again, like was touched on with Rocket League, that's something that they're looking to consider. So, in terms of going back to the question of audience, it all comes down to maturity. And Fortnite's not even been around long, and it's exploded, but sim racing will be a very different journey. So, let's see, I guess.
I think there's some other distinctions compared to other esports as well, because you've got, as we talked about, Formula One drivers doing this, and they're competitive. Like, they could be some of the top drivers in the whole world in sim racing and esports. You don't get that in other esports. So I think you'll see in the future big time competitions coming into this, where you won't just have sim racers taking part, but you'll have Formula One drivers taking part as well, because there's a prize pool that's significant. Not all racing drivers make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And actually, there's only, I think Darren, you were saying there's only like a pool of maybe 100 in the world that actually make enough cash that is significant. So why don't you just develop your talents across real motorsport and sim racing? Because it will be an earner.
And I think that's the point. The audience is split between lots of different championships. We've got Forza with their own championship. Microsoft putting a lot of money into that. You've got Sony putting a lot of money into Gran Turismo. You've got Formula One putting a lot of money into that championship. So we are spread across a number of different areas. And at some point, one of them will become the FIFA, if you like, and then the audience will move towards that, and that will be where the bulk of the effort and expenditure and investment goes.
At this stage, is it more about growing the sim racing ecosystem? So the bigger it grows, the more everyone kind of benefits. At the moment, there's enough room for everyone to grow.
Yeah, I mean, most of us, certainly the people on the panel, will try and work together within the industry that we've got to try and build it up. There's no need for us to fight, which is why it's a good atmosphere at the moment, because we're all trying to build the space up. And of course, on track, we're all as competitive as each other, but off track, I think everyone's working together to try and bring this to the next level, and that level of professionalism, which that's the nervousness that a lot of these brands have got. They've had experiences with gaming, whatever they want to call it. Some of them don't even know what it's called. They'll call it e-gaming, and they've had their fingers burnt because they've dealt with amateur organisations in the past. What we need to do is show that this is a professional platform that they can trust, have an audience, and build credibility within the audience that's there.
To try and answer one of the questions that we set out to, do you think there's an opportunity for this to sit as a standalone? Can it be as big as a real world F1 or the equivalent, and rather than being a kind of an addition to, be as big as?
I guess you asked the same question of FIFA and football. So no, one goes without the other, and that doesn't mean that you're either a sim racer or you're interested in real racing. There is crossover already. I love real racing. I love sim racing. So I don't think it needs to stand alone. Both of them benefit from each other.
Yeah. My view is I think it can. It can outgrow motorsport in the real world. But again, it's all about the audience. And I think, Formula One are worried because their audience is getting older, and they're kind of, it's taken them a long time to recognise esports and think, wow, we need to be engaging with young people. Esports is going to grow and grow and grow and grow. It's more exciting as a market than real world sport, in my opinion. I think with time, I think you look at the likes of Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, who were gamers, now real-life drivers. They've got a responsibility, I think, not a responsibility, but certainly they've got an opportunity to be bringing an audience in the real world to sim racing. And I think, the new generation of real-world motorsport drivers will come from esports and sim racing. And that in itself is exciting. So rather than it being the other way around, where sim racers are going to the real world, I think a lot of real life drivers will be coming from sim racing, And that would be the starting point. That would be the breeding ground.
And by the way, you don't know what the tipping point is, because we talked about Porsche, Audi making some investment in esports, pulling out of Le Mans racing and going into Formula E. So we talked a little about Formula E. Why did they do that? Because a couple of engineers decided that they were going to rig the diesel test. So you had this thing called Dieselgate. So suddenly everyone had to have an electric program. They had to. So suddenly Formula E gone from being on the edge of not carrying on to being the biggest growing area of our sport, making big money now, big revenues. So something will happen, I don't know, Ferrari win the championship and suddenly everyone's got to beat Ferrari, so suddenly money is rationing. There's rumours that the Ferrari drivers in F1 Esports are being paid, 2 or 3 times last year's champion winners. So the money comes, and because of the sport we're in, everyone's competitive. If someone gets ahead, then everyone else will try and get ahead. So it will come, as Jamie said, and we need to stop talking about real or virtual, because there's just going to be this crossover. Virtual drivers are racing in the real world. Real world drivers, as Dom said, there was a guy who came second who was actually a real world driver at the Formula E event we talked about with the $1 million. He earned 100 grand in a night. Well, that's probably more than he earned that year as a racing driver, because he was coming up through the ranks. So, of course, if I'm a real driver and I'm not earning big money in the real world, I'm going to go and have a go in the virtual world.
It's also about accessibility, because the biggest issue that motorsport faces is budget. It costs a lot of money to go through any season in motorsport, but you can pick up a wheel and pedals or a controller and race online with your friends, and that's the beauty of it. And that's like Darren touched on. You can't pick up a controller, play Call of Duty and become a sniper in the army, but you can drive with a wheel and pedals at home and be competing in the real world. And that's why I think it's
dead right. And just like a season of karting costs 100 grand.
Yeah.
And that's like when you're, how old? I don't know, I didn't do karting, but when you're like 6 or 7, and it's a huge amount of money for a family to try and raise for, you might not be competitive, but sim racing, pick up wheel and pedals for, $300, $400, and then you're on track and you can compete with the best in the world.
Yeah, 100%.
You can even compete with Lando and Max.
Yeah, and race against them at home. That's the another amazing thing. You can be racing a Formula 1 driver from your bedroom, which is amazing. And I think you look at the F1 grid. Maybe 3/4 of that grid pay to be on the grid. Probably aren't getting salaries. Lewis Hamilton, Vettel, Max Verstappen, and Lando, probably a handful of drivers that are getting paid. The rest of them are having to source sponsorship and pay their way to actually drive. That in itself is a crazy thing, and that's why I'm passionate about sim racing becoming a really exciting esport.
And I think it's an interesting topic because for us, for instance, at Renault, we have this year as a F1 Esport driver, Jarno Opmer, and he used to be our Renault Sport Academy driver, so he was driving in F4, vice-champion in F4, driving in Euro Cup still last year. And the thing is that if you don't get results in motorsport, you may lose sponsors, you may lose support, but you can go back in esports, and that's what he did, actually. So it's very interesting that you can come from motorsport and go to esports, and as well come from esport and go to the motorsport industry as well.
We've got one question I want to ask, and I've got a final one to just finish on. But one question is, what do you think are the biggest challenges sim racing faces to grow as an esport?
Just from my side, I think Renault have done a really great job in attaching themselves and partnering with a big esports organisation in Vitality, and I think a lot of manufacturers can learn lessons from kind of partnering with top esports teams and bringing those audiences to what's happening in sim racing. So I think the young audience they're smart, and I think they would much rather resonate with an esports team that they support than a manufacturer of a car. And I think what Renault have done with Vitality needs to happen more. If you're bringing the likes of, if Ferrari are partnering with FaZe, for example, that's just opening up, quite simply, a huge audience that I don't think sim racing can do on its own. I think manufacturers and even brands can do a really good job in partnering with them and bringing those audiences to sim racing. That's my personal opinion. And I don't think organically, if you left it, it would get to a big enough level.
The move from amateur to professional. You know, we've got a lot of people that are talking to these top brands that haven't had a experience of the commercial world. They're representing the sport, and yet they're not necessarily putting the professional side of the sport across. Obviously, us guys have all got experience, you know, in different areas of life: banking, football, automotive. Myself, automotive, and hopefully we're bringing the professionalism of that sport up. But you know, sometimes the first experience that people have is with someone that isn't professional, and then everyone can lose interest. So we've got to work together to make this a professional platform.
For me, it's quite fragmented. There are every automotive's doing their own thing. Every series is doing its own thing. So many different people are doing their own thing. Actually, we need to build some unifying structure that everybody just tunes into that Saturday afternoon. And I think it's going to happen, maybe in the next year and a half, but it will. That's what we need, less fragmentation.
My final thing would be, one of the questions we set out, when are we going to see, or are we going to see, a sim racer who's come through purely from the sim background into an F1 car, Formula E car, NASCAR, whichever car it be, on a pro level?
Well, my personal view is yes. I think that the skills that the top sim racers have are very much aligned to what skills F1 drivers, or whatever you think the pinnacle of motorsport is. It's very, very similar. And also, it's a great opportunity, another marketing opportunity for an F1 team to say, look, you can migrate through our F1 Esports program or whatever, and then get in the car and actually maybe do a test, maybe beat the F1 drivers.
I think it will take time for F1 team, you know, to recruit one.
We're not going to see anyone in a
Esport.
Renault car just yet.
But I think definitely in motorsport in general, it's possible and it will happen. It's already happening with Brandon Lee. I think he's driving in F4 or something. Formula Ford. I think Sam Bolumbasi from Red Bull, he's driving in GT4 at the moment. So yeah, it will take time. I don't think nearly in time we will have an F1 driver coming from esports, but definitely in motorsport, yeah, it will grow. We need to wait a little bit for that.
I'll repeat what I said before. It's already happened, because you'll never be able to get someone that's only done one thing. The blurring has happened. They'll come through the different space. A very quick example, GT Sport, the old Gran Turismo, the winner of their World Championship last year, is currently racing in a higher level series in effectively what the old Formula 3. He's beaten someone with the surname of Fittipaldi, and he's beaten someone with the surname of Schumacher. So, you know, the nepotism that's happened in motorsport previously of son of coming through and winning is changing, because this kid who's come out of nowhere and won a gaming championship, has got sponsored because of that gaming championship, is now beating those two kids. So it's happening. It's already happened. The blurring's happened.
Yeah, just to finish it off, I think it's a matter of when, not if. You know, these guys are hugely talented. They're putting in more hours than you could possibly put in on a track because they're playing at home. And like you said, the lines are so blurred that it is definitely going to happen. It's just, I think that with Formula One, it's the pinnacle of the sport. You can't just jump in an F1 car and be deemed safe on a track anyway. But you know, with guys like Lando and Max in there already promoting and pushing out, yeah, like I say, it will definitely happen for sure.
There's lots we could have carried on into. Hopefully you found it interesting, and we've touched on a few topics. But thank you very much to our panel, and thank you very much to you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.